So the way the case came to us was through one of the students at my university. He wasn't in my class, but he saw a call for submissions I put out in writing a couple years back. And he is actually Linda's nephew. And so he filled out the submission form. We did a lot of research on her case. We contacted him. His name is Mike. He put us in touch with Linda's siblings, next of kin, and we had several meetings with the family. And then we decided we think this is a case that we could get forward progress on. So that's how it came to us. And yeah, her being a fellow veteran kind of tugged at my heart a little more.
Yeah.
But also the case just hadn't been worked. I mean, it was clear, like, really nothing had been done in many years. There was nothing in the media. No podcast had ever covered it. It just felt like it had just been put on a shelf, you know? And so my partner and I, we always go to the location where a victim was killed before we make any announcement that publicly that we're taking on their case. So that's what we did. In November of 2022, went up to Port Orchard, Washington, where Linda was killed. And do you want me to give some background on her case? Or
sure, please do.
So Linda was 47 years old. She was stabbed to death inside her home. It was actually a rental house she had lived in for 11 years. Pretty small house, about 1,000 square feet, 2-bedroom, bath. It was in a residential neighborhood on a really one of the main streets in Port Orchard. Port Orchard is a very small little town. It's like one of those really quaint communities on the water that everybody knows everybody. Very scenic and beautiful. And she had actually been stationed in Bremerton across the bay there previously when she was in the Navy. So once she separated from the Navy, she decided to move back to that area. But she had never been married. She didn't have kids. She did not have a roommate or a live-in boyfriend. She lived alone in this home. Linda was an extremely social person. She loved to go out and party. She was a paralegal by trade. That's what she'd been trained to be in the Navy. And then she carried that on in her civilian life afterwards and ended up working for the county DA's office or prosecutor's office for many years. And then after that, some private law firms. So she basically stayed in that profession for most of her life. But on the evening or night of April 29th or the early morning hours of April 30th of 2008, someone came in her home and stabbed her to death. She suffered 24 stab wounds. She was found in the, I guess you call it the master bedroom, the bedroom she had her bed in a very awkward location because she had this large waterbed that took up a lot of the room. And she was on the far side of it, like kind of crunched into the corner on the far side of this bed between the bed and the wall, small space. And she was nude when she was found. She had many defensive wounds. So she put up a fight. This is a very, you can tell, a dynamic situation where she was able to fight her attacker for at least part of it. But ultimately she suffered 4 wounds that any one of them in and of themselves would have been lethal. And so those were 2 to her liver, 1 to her heart, and 1 to her spinal cord. And the coroner told me that that 1 to the spinal cord likely paralyzed her. So it seems like that would be the last one. But then she's in this very weird position that would be really hard for the killer to get to her spinal cord. So that's still kind of one of those details we debate back and forth. So then we're pretty sure the killer left the home and then came back later and set it on fire. And this is also a unique aspect because instead of like breaking a window or going back inside the home to set the fire, they actually cut the caulk and removed her living room window from the outside, set it on the ground against the chimney, threw accelerant in through that window, and then something to light it, and then took off. The fire was discovered at 3:58 in the morning on April 30th by Linda's neighbor, and they called 911. The neighbor tried to get in the house because he figured she's probably in there due to the early morning hour, but he was overcome by the heat and the smoke. And I tried to, make him feel better. It's like she was beyond saving anyways, because she was already deceased when the fire started. So there was no smoke in her trachea or lungs or anything like that. So those are the basics of that day and her murder.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you tonight?
It's great to always be with you, Ray. Thanks for having me on.
Isn't that the truth? It's just your lucky day. That's all I can say.
It is. Nice.
We're even luckier today, Jim. I'd like to welcome back an alumni of the Cold Red podcast, Jen Bukholz. For some of our new listeners, did I get that right, Jen? Did I get that right? Good.
Yes.
For some of our new listeners, Jen is a cold case investigator who teaches forensics and criminal justice courses at American Military Institute. She's an Army veteran, as well as extensive experience in counterintelligence. Jen, welcome back to the show. It's a pleasure again having you on Cold Red today.
Thank you guys so much. It's my pleasure.
And thank you again for your service.
Yes, ma'am.
Even also, a few weeks after Veterans Day.
Yes, also my pleasure. It was a great time in my life.
Absolutely. And now a great time in your life is trying to help solve cases. In fact, as a reminder to our audience, I think it was about 5 years ago, give or take, a cold email came from Jen Bukholz and about a case in Arkansas, and we did our best to work it together, and I think it was finally resolved.
It was resolved. There is a guy serving 40 years in prison now for her murder, so I would call that a level of resolution, yes.
I'll never forget with that case, one of our options was to suggest to the Arkansas State Police, who was the investigating agency, to go to the VDOC Society, to which Ray and I belong, the cold case solving group in Philadelphia. We meet the third Thursday of every month and try to solve cases from around the country. And somehow the family of Rebecca got hold of this idea of looking to solve this case, and they called the VDOC Society and complained about me.
I was horrified.
How dare I interfere in their case? And they're my friends. I mean, they knew I didn't do anything wrong. I'm retired from the FBI at this time, and I said, I'm just talking with this person, Jen. She's in touch with some members of the family. It's weird in family situations, that, especially with a homicide, we don't have to go into this whole thing again. Some people wanted the case just put away and not looked at when it was unsolved. And I think the dad and maybe one other family member wanted it solved, and they were working with you. It was a confusing time, and I never got in trouble before it, VDOC. And, of course, I explained the situation. I said it was all Jen Bukholz's fault, of course.
Yeah, of course. That's fine. I'll take it.
But now you did some good work. I helped out with a letter. I actually said it was not written by the killer, this kind of fake letter, a POMIC, post-offense manipulation of investigation communication, if you know anything about that term I created in forensic linguistics. And the bottom line is that the police took over and finally gave it that, that second or third wind, and they resolved it. But in no small part, thanks to your work too, Jen. So you fill us in a little bit. How did you kind of get into, we know you're in the military, but you're teaching criminalistics or forensics, and you're also working on unsolved cases. Walk our audience again, sort of a summary of how that all came about.
Yeah, I went to college, and then I actually wanted to go FBI and do exactly what you guys did and be a profiler. But I didn't really have any on-the-ground experience, so their best suggestion was like either go be a cop or join the military. So I evaluated the options, and I thought the military would actually be better because there's certain jobs within the Army where you can do investigations and get a top secret clearance and get some pretty specialized training and experience. And so that's the route I went. And many years later, find out how many skill sets from counterintelligence actually overlap with investigating cold cases. So my training and experience has been really valuable to me. And I did other contracts overseas. I went to both combat zones, led some counterintelligence teams over there. And then my husband was basically like, are you ever going to come home? Because to do traditional counterintelligence, you're not in the country. And so that's when I started my master's in forensic science. And then I started teaching that at American Military University. And a few years into teaching, my boss and I were just kind of talking about all these unsolved cases one day. And I'm like, what if we could develop like a volunteer team, of students and faculty who want to help with these cases, and we could get law enforcement on board and they would allow us to help them. And maybe we could even turn it into a class. Like I was thinking way beyond, probably too big of a dream. But anyways, he really liked the idea. But it's taken us several years to kind of get it more formalized. But since I was on your show last, I did finalize our Introduction to Cold Case Investigations class. It is supposed to be offered starting in January of 2026. So if anybody out there is interested, I designed it for both, where I think it will give skills to both law enforcement and civilians, whichever side you're on. I wanted to cater to both. It's very project-based. It's not like memorize a bunch of stuff and take a quiz every week. There's no exams in it. And you don't have to be a full-time student at our university to take one class. So it is an option out there, and I can provide my contact info at the end if anybody has questions. But
give it right now, since you brought it up, then we'll do it again at the end. Contact info.
So the other thing I did in the past year was start a nonprofit called Break the Case. And that was to make our volunteer team more formal and to have a website featuring the cases that we worked on and have kind of a landing spot for people, families, law enforcement, others that are interested. They can go to one site and see what we do. So the best way to get a hold of me is just go to breakthecase.org. And then there's a submission form that goes straight to my email, or you can email me at info@breakthecase.org. So hopefully that's simple enough.
We'll come back to that when we're over. Go ahead, Ray.
Jen, it's been about a year since you were last on with us. And the last time you were on, we talked about the Rebecca Gould case. Mm-hmm. I don't know where you're at with that. I know you're doing some current work at Break the Case, but is there any significant updates on any of the cases that you're working that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, in terms of Rebecca, as if listeners heard our previous conversation, then they learned that her killer, William Miller, when he confessed to her murder, confessed to 5 others. But he claimed he didn't know the names of any of the other victims because they were sex workers. He did provide some details on some of those crimes and locations. So we put together, so the Arkansas State Police seems to have zero interest in pursuing those other confessions and victims. They've pretty much written it off, that he made it up. And I guess he could have. But the more we learn about him, like from past girlfriends and people he worked with, I actually got a hold of his laptop, believe it or not. I don't know why state police didn't seize that, but in getting all this other intel on him, the more we learn, the more we're like, feel sure he probably does have more victims. So we have a crowdsourcing project long-term where we're going through the jurisdictions and the locations that he named, trying to identify unsolved cases that match up with some of the details he gave. And then eventually we will probably have to contact those agencies directly and try to talk to them about what we know about him, what we've found out about him, and see if there's anything they can do to, hopefully just eliminate him. But if not, at least, look at him as a suspect. So that's probably the biggest update. And that's, like I said, it's just a long-term project. If anybody out there is interested in that, it's just online research. You don't need any special skills. You just need some patience. Email me. I'll add you to the list and give you access to the spreadsheet. We can always use more help. So that's the biggest update on his part.
Great. What about this? I know this one's kind of close and dear to your heart. You've been working on a case. It's a 17-year-old case of a U.S. Navy veteran. Her name is Linda Malcolm. Can you elaborate a little bit on this case and what's going on with it?
Sure. So the way the case came to us was through one of the students at my university. He wasn't in my class, but he saw a call for submissions I put out in writing a couple years back, and he is actually Linda's nephew. And so he filled out the submission form. We did a lot of research on her case. We contacted him. His name is Mike. He put us in touch with Linda's siblings, next of kin, and we had several meetings with the family, and then we decided we think this is a case that we could get forward progress on. So that's how it came to us. And her being a fellow veteran kind of tugged at my heart a little more.
Yeah.
But also the case just hadn't been worked. I mean, it was clear, really nothing had been done in many years. There was nothing in the media. No podcast had ever covered it. It just felt like it had just been put on a shelf, And so my partner and I, we always go to the location where a victim was killed before we make any announcement publicly that we're taking on their case. So that's what we did. In November of 2022, went up to Port Orchard, Washington, where Linda was killed. And do you want me to give some background on her case?
Sure, please do.
So Linda was 47 years old. She was stabbed to death inside her home. It was actually a rental house she had lived in for 11 years. Pretty small house, about 1,000 square feet, 2-bedroom bath. It was in a residential neighborhood on a really one of the main streets in Port Orchard. Port Orchard is a very small little town. It's like one of those really quaint communities on the water that everybody knows everybody. Very scenic and beautiful. And she had actually been stationed in Bremerton across the bay there previously when she was in the Navy. So once she separated from the Navy, she decided to move back to that area. But she had never been married. She didn't have kids. She did not have a roommate or a live-in boyfriend. She lived alone in this home. Linda was an extremely social person. She loved to go out and party. She was a paralegal by trade. That's what she'd been trained to be in the Navy. And then she carried that on in her civilian life afterwards and ended up working for the county DA's office or prosecutor's office for many years. And then after that, some private law firms. So she basically stayed in that profession for most of her life. But on the evening or night of April 29th or the early morning hours of April 30th of 2008, someone came in her home and stabbed her to death. She suffered 24 stab wounds. She was found in I guess you call it the master bedroom, the bedroom she had her bed in a very awkward location because she had this large waterbed that took up a lot of the room. And she was on the far side of it, like kind of crunched into the corner on the far side of this bed between the bed and the wall, small space. And she was nude when she was found. She had many defensive wounds, so she put up a fight. This is a very, you can tell, dynamic situation where she was able to fight her attacker for at least part of it. But ultimately, she suffered 4 wounds that any one of them in and of themselves would have been lethal. And so those were 2 to her liver, 1 to her heart, and 1 to her spinal cord. And the coroner told me that 1 to the spinal cord likely paralyzed her. So it seems like that would be the last one. But then she's in this very weird position that would be really hard for the killer to get to her spinal cord. So that's still kind of one of those details we debate back and forth. So then we're pretty sure the killer left the home and then came back later and set it on fire. And this is also a unique aspect because instead of like breaking a window or going back inside the home to set the fire, they actually cut the caulk and removed her living room window from the outside, set it on the ground against the chimney, threw accelerant in through that window, and then something to light it, and then took off. The fire was discovered at 3:58 in the morning on April 30th by Linda's neighbor, and they called 911. The neighbor tried to get in the house because he figured she's probably in there due to the early morning hour, but he was overcome by the heat and the smoke, and I tried to, make him feel better. It's like she was beyond saving anyways, because she was already deceased when the fire started. So there was no smoke in her trachea or lungs or anything like that. So those are the basics of that day and her murder.
Jen, if we can back up a little bit, you gave us a nice summary of the crime scene. Nice in terms of detail, not, of course, what happened.
Right.
Victimology is important. And you told us a little bit about her, single, no kids. Mm-hmm. And I think I heard you right. She was very social and liked to party.
Yes.
I think that's the word you used. Okay.
Yes.
Did she have a boyfriend, or did she have male suitors or visitors, anything of which you may be aware?
Not at that period in her life. We've tracked down many of her very close friends that she would hang out with on a regular basis. And they said she did not have a steady boyfriend at the time of her death. She had several in the past. In fact, she'd been engaged a couple times previously, but those relationships had ended long before this occurred. And it doesn't sound like they ended on really a negative note. I know at least one of them who I've spoken with, one of her exes that I spoke with, mentioned her lifestyle and that she didn't want to give up that social life. And he just wasn't really having it. It just wasn't jiving with him. And so that relationship ended. But she did like to date around. Some would call her promiscuous, but hey, she's single. She's a single woman. Do whatever you want to do, She was a drinker. She loved to drink red wine. I would call her a functioning alcoholic. It doesn't appear to me that she would go to work drunk, but she would definitely go out for drinks after work and then on the weekend be out partying. It sounds like she also dabbled in marijuana and cocaine. Have not heard from anybody that saw her do anything heavier than that. And it sounds like she was just more of a social user of those drugs, not a regular daily user or any kind of addiction. And just so listeners know, her family is very aware of all of this. We discussed this at great length. So I don't want people to think I'm trying to shame or blame a victim. We would never do that. No. But as you said, Fitz, the victimology is so important and people need to understand what her lifestyle really was like.
Was she... Did the autopsy indicate whether she was sexually assaulted or not?
There's no indication of sexual assault.
I thought I read that.
Nope. And also her toxicology was completely clean, which her family has kind of joked around about, are they sure they didn't mix up her liver or blood with somebody else? Because they were really shocked that she didn't have any alcohol, at least in her system.
What night, real quick, one night of the week was April 30th. What week?
So the 29th into the 30th was a Tuesday into a Wednesday. So weeknight. And
last question, was she out at the bars that night?
Not that anybody saw. The last time we can track her movements out in public is buying groceries at the Safeway grocery store around 2:16 in the afternoon. And then her best friend said they spoke late afternoon, maybe around 5 on the phone. I don't have the phone records, but I don't have no reason to not believe that friend. And then her next door neighbor said Linda came out and spoke with them for a few minutes because, one other detail, Linda was planning to move residences that coming weekend. And I don't think the timing of this murder is a coincidence in regards to her upcoming move. But anyway, she had told her next door neighbor there'd be a moving truck coming either the next day or maybe on the 1st to pack her stuff and help her move.
I'm going to jump back a little bit with you. You mentioned that the area that was concentrated on for the accelerant that was placed to start the fire was in the living room.
Yes.
And you mentioned that she was in the master bedroom, and there wasn't a whole lot of area there to be able to move around.
Right.
Did the police determine that the body was moved from maybe the living room, or they were trying to destroy evidence in that area, or did the act take place in the bedroom?
So police haven't divulged much about the evidence they found in the house, so I don't have a whole lot of insight on that. We've pieced together some of it through the fire investigation side because we have a fire/arson expert on our team who was able to look at all of those investigative documents and photos. So we honestly don't know where in the house blood was found other than in the bedroom, because I do have the autopsy photos and there is pretty large pool blood under her body. But obviously that doesn't mean she wasn't moved, but it would be a really difficult place to move her to because of it's such tight quarters, and to get all the way around this big clunky bed, there's like a 6-inch gap between the dresser and the end of the bed. So it's not impossible, but I don't see any indication that she was moved. But we do believe at least part of this attack occurred in the bedroom because that water bed was empty. And we can get into this later, but we actually did a whole fire arson experiment replicating this fire with a waterbed, and that waterbed didn't burst. So we think the bed probably got punctured during the altercation with her attacker by the knife.
How about entry? Was there any signs of forced entry from the rear? No, you said they fled from the rear. There's no sign of forced entry?
There was no sign of forced entry. The house only had 2 doors, front and back. It appears both were locked when the fire department showed up. And that's one reason we think the person left and then came back to the property. But there's no forced entry. And we're also pretty certain she knew her attacker. So either the person knew how to sneak in the house or she let him in. It's probably one of the two.
Going back to Jim's victimology at the outset, which is something we always look at, any way I know we're 17 years later, but based upon information or even the family reconstructing the last couple weeks of her life, any altercations with anybody, any issues with somebody, she was having a problem with somebody, because it just, you're right. The person that did this is probably someone she's familiar with. And, the physical altercation occurs in the home. There's defensive wounds, you said, on the hands and forearms. So It looks like she was attempting to block those things.
Yes.
And the movement around the house suggests the other injuries. And I know I had a chance to look at some of the autopsy photos, and she had injuries to the shoulders, the upper arms, and the back as well.
Yes, all over.
So it could have started in the living room, and it could have ended up in.
Yes, we've debated that too. Like, were they in the kitchen, or and someone grabs a knife, or were they something going on in the living room?
No, I know the house was burnt and severely. I saw the pictures, but any indication of blood spatter?
If there is, the police haven't shared that with us.
Okay.
So
I think this is a good. You finish your statement. Go ahead.
So the only blood evidence that we know of for certain is underneath her body on the floor of that bedroom.
And I think we should emphasize here, we're all working on the outer periphery of this case. I know you've done some research and have some media accounts, and I'm not sure what kind of police reports you may have access to, but none of us here is the actual investigator for that crime. So we only go so far. We don't know exactly what else the police may know in that regard, but we'll do the best we can with the information we have. 24 stab wounds, if that's the accurate number, but that's known as overkill or sustained aggression. And that's usually a sign of high emotionality, anger, frustration of the perpetrator, of the offender. The stabber in this case is conceivably her victim. In this case, possibly his great frustration at Linda for whatever reason. So that's an indicator there. And I also find so that's a clue that, again, Linda knew her offender. Another clue is that the offender was afraid that other people may have known who a likely suspect would be, And he thought the best way to, in fact, try to hide any evidence would be to burn the house down. And that's pretty much what he did. I mean, the structure is still standing, I know. But if he felt there were fingerprints in there or some kind of DNA evidence, by 2008, certainly DNA was in the headlines in terms of solving cases. That's another clue. There's no reason, if this was a stranger, why burn the house down?
Yeah, I know.
And why, of course, overkill a 24 stab wounds to get it done. So we have two separate yet related indicators here that our victim knew her offender, and the anger, people don't get angered at strangers. I mean, conceivably it's possible, a road rage type thing, but where it goes on like this in someone's home, the middle of the night, there's clear indications that there's some former relationship. We don't know what that is. Boyfriend, could it be a jealous woman? I don't know who did it, or some other woman, but then also the arson. And I'll leave this part with, if you commit an arson, such as this one we see in this case, you've probably done it before, and or you know what it takes to start, and I'll go on a limb here a little bit, maybe even put out a fire. So I'm not casting aspersions on anyone in little Port Orchard there, but someone has done arsons before, maybe smaller, maybe never caught, maybe never arrested, and it's possible they get off on seeing things burn down. I'll leave it at that.
You know, I have to agree with you on this, Jim. I mean, I think just the location of the fire and the way it was indicated to spread was more of an intent to destroy evidence, forensic evidence, than it was to harm the victim. Because if you wanted to really get rid of the stuff with the victim, you would have started the fire where the victim was staying. That wasn't it.
Everyone I've talked to, so our arson expert, he's retired from fire department, 30 years, teaches at a fire science academy, all this stuff. He's like, I never went to a homicide scene where the body or the room the body was in was not the point of origin. He's like, this is the only one where the point of origin is actually the farthest away in the house you can get from the body.
Yeah.
And that's very odd, apparently. We don't know exactly what to make of it, but it's
yet perhaps
detail.
The person knew there was enough kindling material and burnable material in that house that the fire would spread, and that would give the person time to get away. So there could be explanations or reasons for that. And the whole removal of the window, as so described, the person probably has experience doing that.
Absolutely.
And had at least some tool with him.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, you're spot on. I mean, psychologically, when you combine that stabbing with the arson, it indicates a mix of impulsivity along with premeditation. I mean, think about this individual, this violent action is followed by calculated steps to conceal the crime. When you take those things together, it points to a pattern that this offender knew the victim personally and had a strong emotional reaction, which, as you were talking about, possibly escalated from an argument, a personal grievance, or she might have betrayed him or her. And there's something going on here that I wish we had more information. And that will be what Jim talked about in the beginning. That will be found when in the study of the victimology of the victim. It really is important.
Yeah, and the removal of that window. So when we zoom in on the photos, we can see that the caulk was cut. So they brought a knife or something sharp, and there's pry marks. So at a minimum, they brought, I guess we'll just call it a knife, a pry bar, an accelerant, and then something to light the fire with. Like that part, as you said, is like, it's got to be somewhat premeditated, even if it's only 30 minutes or whatever. Whereas the attack on her seems much more chaotic to me, like not well planned. Because if someone, well, now that person knows it's really hard to stab another human being. Like it's not an easy way to kill somebody. And I don't think they realize that.
It's not. And it's very up close and personal. It takes upper body strength, especially if it's a non-compliant. Everyone's a non-compliant, stabbing victim. They're going to fight somehow. The defensive wounds on her arms are indicative of that. So, there's a whole, series of events that occurred with this person, with her. I can't imagine, I'm certainly hoping the police took all of her phone calls from landline and cell phone at least 6 months before.
Yes.
Not to mention all emails, text messages, everything in there. And I'm telling you, I would be very surprised, just what we know from the crime scene itself, that either the offender is not one of the people she was communicating with, or at least one of the people she was communicating with somehow knew the offender, directly, indirectly, somehow.
Sure.
And do you know anything about what the police did with her social contacts, even at work? And she's a paralegal in the DA's office or prosecutor's office. I don't know. Is it possible there was some case she was working on? Someone got jail time. did someone just get released? But usually they don't go after the paralegals. They may go after the cops or the prosecutors themselves. But I mean, all of these parts of her life would have to be examined. You know anything about that?
I know they got her phone records. I don't know how far before the murder they got them for. I know at least a few days, but I don't know if they got them 6 months prior. I know that they were able to recover her computer in the guest bedroom, which wasn't too affected by the fire. It was affected, but probably the least affected. They told us that they did recover her computer. They had the hard drive analyzed, and then they were able to access her email, and they claimed to us they didn't find anything incriminating, but they won't let us. And I kind of get it. Like, that's pretty hard evidence. I really want civilians probably looking at that, but those are the main two things in terms of those communication methods that they looked at. I think they did some interviews of coworkers, but honestly, most people we've talked to, the police didn't go interview them. Unfortunately, I think, and I'm not trying, to burn the police or anything, but I think they really missed a lot of key interviews because we've interviewed almost like 100 people through our effort. And a lot of those said, police never came and talked to me. And so we've brought that issue up, like part of cold cases, you really need to go back and re-interview and re-canvass the neighborhood and stuff like that. And it hasn't happened yet. So, but we're hopeful.
You describe Port Orchard as sort of a quaint, bucolic type of town on the water. Do you know how large their police department is? How many sworn?
I don't know the number, but it's tiny because they only have one detective slot, and there's a detective slot.
Lack of experience, really.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to throw this out and ask this question: how far removed was she from military service? How long has she been out?
Let's see. She separated from the Navy in 1992, so we're 16 years on.
16 years.
Yep.
I just thinking, because she's military, she is physically capable, she's disciplined, she's vigilant. You usually don't lose those things, and that's going to influence her interactions, especially if this was a stranger and her resistance to that. And then so it always makes me wonder if the offender might have been someone that also had past military experience or knowledge, because that could affect their method of attack, because their awareness of security measures, their ability to overpower someone who also is somewhat trained. Because I always look at veterans, they maintain, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Jen, but veterans maintain routines, they maintain social connections, at least from knowing my father, and they have security habits that they kind of just stick with. And, that can have an influence when you're looking at some of these things in reference to some of maybe her personal acquaintances, because usually you hang out with that same type of individual.
Yep.
You know what I mean? You're attracted to that individual.
And you have that camaraderie or that thing, that past that's similar. So, and this is a military heavy area because the Bremerton Naval Yard is right there. So there's a lot of military in the area. So it might not have been a military member she knew from her time in service, but maybe one she met later on that lived there.
The mitigating factor, Ray, as you know, to perhaps her level of preparedness, physical fitness, street survival skills. The best of us, Ray, if we're sound asleep and we're taken by surprise, that throws all that stuff out the window. Now, of course, you would have a security system set up of some sort if you were really going to be prepared, as one should be. But if somehow you are caught asleep in your bed at 3-something in the morning, the person standing over you definitely has the advantage and the element of surprise on their side.
But it appears in this that it wasn't located to just one area. So I don't know, and there wasn't any forced entry. So I don't know if she sleeps with her doors open or whether she lets someone in. I don't know what time of the day it was, but apparently the fire, it's determined at 3:28 in the morning. So this person does what he does, or she, and they leave. Then they come back. And, you can't take out a window in 5 minutes. It takes a little bit of time to do that. It tells me there's a lot of premeditation, a lot of thought going into it with this individual here. And I'm thinking, and I'm looking, I'm going, wow. I mean, he's really, really taking a lot of time with this. So it could have happened did they ever determine a cause, a time of death, based upon?
No, because although she has thermal injuries, they're actually not too terrible, but she's in that pugilistic pose where her muscles tightened up and stuff. And so that destroyed the use of rigor mortis, I believe, in that aspect. And I'm not sure if lividity was able to be seen either. So they don't know. I mean, I can't tell. You guys read the autopsy report. I just have to put it at, well, probably early evening till about 3 a.m, somewhere in there is when she was attacked.
And we mentioned rigor mortis. That's the body when it stiffens after so many hours and the muscles tense up with the blood withdrawing. Lividity is the blood settling down in the lowest part of the body, just for our audience out there. These aren't pleasant things to discuss, but dead bodies do tell stories, and we can tell if a body's been moved and altered in any way, or at least they can give a good, guesstimate of those type of things. That is important for everyone to know. Do you know offhand if the Washington State Police are at all involved in this case, or is it strictly Port Orchard?
I don't think they are. Back when we started our side of the investigation, they did. There was a different detective on board then who was very good at collaborating with us and very good at communication. And she actually went and got a grant so that she could bring in a couple investigators from the state level attorney general's office for a certain amount of time. And we did meet them. We met all of them. And there was an FBI agent who was supposedly helping them as well. We all had a big meeting the second time we went up there. And then when she left the department, it seems like all of that has dropped off. And the family has asked them to please bring in the state police, or we even said, ask them about the VDOC Society. Like maybe they'll present it to them. There's another set of retired FBI profilers. You can probably know them from the Consult podcast. They offered up their services. And the police just are, I hate to say it, they're just being so resistant to outside help. And yet it's clear that this is above their level. And that's not a hit on them, but cold cases are so different than a fresh assault or homicide or domestic violence or whatever that just happened. It's just a totally different methodology. So we're just continuing to try to find every resource possible and offer it to them and hope that at some point they'll take it.
Jen, I know you said you went with your group and you did, you attempted to do a reconstruction with
we
the
did
arson.
A full reconstruction of the arson, actually.
Did you? And did you look at it from just the perspective of the arson, or did you look at it where you were simulating events based on evidence, location, and things of that nature?
We mostly just focus on the arson. So Alan Haskins is our arson fire expert. And about a year and a half ago, when he was the director of the fire science program at Black River Technical College out in Arkansas, they had a house donated to the program. And so he calls him one day and he goes, "Hey, Jen, we got this house donated for training." And he's like, "Guess what? The layout is really similar to Linda's house, except it's flip-flopped." And I'm like, "Huh. So what are you thinking?" He's like, "Well, we could do a test burn, and try to start the fire the way we think that this person did and find a waterbed and all this stuff." And so they did. And they actually, I hope this doesn't upset listeners, but a local farmer donated a pig as a stand-in for a human body. And so the students got some great experience through this because they took our crime scene photos and they set up this house similarly. And then they removed the window from the living room, which is across the house from the main bedroom, and lit, threw accelerant in through that window and then lit the fire from there and filmed the whole thing to watch and try to learn how the fire moved through Linda's house. And something I forgot to mention is when her neighbor went over after the fire discovery and tried to get in to help her, he actually broke out her bedroom window. And so Alan did the same thing after a few minutes of starting his fire. And that really accelerated the progress of the fire towards the back of the house. So it was a very interesting experiment. Like I said, one of the things was the waterbed, and it didn't burst. Her waterbed somehow lost all its water, and it wasn't because of the fire. And so, of course, we provided that entire full-length video to police, and hopefully it's of use to them.
That's a very interesting experiment. You don't hear that happening too often.
No, you don't.
With a house about the same dimensions.
Yeah.
So good for that expert with whom you work to put that together for you, and hopefully that was somewhat helpful to the police as they hopefully continue their investigation.
Right, exactly. And if something I forgot to mention, also going back to Linda, she was very petite. She was only about 5'3" and maybe 110 pounds or so. So it's not lost on us that she was able to defend herself for a while, and a while being probably 2 to 4 minutes, but that could actually be a really long time in comparison to some others, especially for her size. And so it's not lost on us that her attacker was not able to overpower her right away. And so that does make us wonder, is this a smaller stature person that attacked her and not some, big bodybuilder that could just control her immediately? So I think that could be a clue. And then we have a knife expert also, and he is pretty convinced that she was upright for at least part of this attack. So it didn't all just occur with her laying on the bed.
Okay.
But of course, we don't know how it started and if she started laying down or, how that happened. But she was in different positions as she was incurring these injuries.
Jim, I'm gonna throw something out and then tell me what your thoughts are on this. And Jen, you've been in this, but I'm really leaning towards an offender that has prior military experience. And the reason why I say that is because the offender had to be physically capable of overpowering Linda, suggesting that that person had average or above average strength. The second thing is they were very knowledgeable about knives and possibly fire. And Jim said that early on. And that indicates some planning or familiarity with the tools that were used to commit the crime. And lastly, which I think is very, very telling, is they were capable of leaving the scene without being immediately caught, suggesting that they were confident, they were calm under pressure, and that they had prior preparation for this. What are your thoughts on that?
And I'll add, they may have done some version of this before. Okay. Stabbed someone, lit something on fire, perhaps together, perhaps separate. Yeah, I wouldn't want the investigators to put, horse blinders on, but, she's a vet. They're living in a town, adjacent to an army base or a military base. Sure, let's look who transferred in, transferred out during that time frame. Again, easier. Well, actually, it would be easy if they can get the right records. The military is pretty good at keeping those kinds of records. But yeah, I mean, if she's 5'3" and 110, I think you said, she's not that big or that strong, but you would think she would at least have the confidence and the basic street smarts to put up some kind of a fight. But it sounds like this person overwhelmed her, maybe some sort of a blitz attack. She may have let him in, and the person was hiding the knife in his hand, but then all of a sudden the attack started, and of course somehow she wound up on the waterbed and the far side of it and went from there. So piecing together exactly what happened in a house that's been destroyed, which quite frankly was probably the reason the person set it on fire, including perhaps fingerprints, other things such as that. But but boy, she was known to this guy, and she knew this guy, and there's no doubt he's done something like this before, and possibly he's done something like this, since then. The suspect pool in the grand scheme of, unsolved homicides, we may be able to get this down, 100, a few dozen, with people that she knows with some sort of past about them or future from the time the incident occurred in 2008. Rarely do people just offend once and not again. It does happen, but you're going to have some level of domestic abuse, fire setting to some degree with someone who did exactly what was done to our victim, Linda Malcolm.
I agree. I think this was impulsive, but it was calculated. I think when you combine this sudden emotional aggression, the stabbing, with planned concealment arson, I think there may exhibit traits of narcissism or entitlement, like they felt justified in committing this violence. And the thing that I keep going back to this, I feel that they were capable of rationalizing these acts to achieve whatever their goal may have been: revenge, emotional dominance, to silence this person for something they had done either that night or previously, and they were being shunned. Because I think what the autopsy showed is that the first wounds came from behind. Am I right now? Yeah. So they came from behind. So Jim's right. It was a blitz attack. She didn't expect it, or maybe she did, but she turned and this person had something and they just went crazy.
It's interesting because we, of course, I have some expertise in autopsies and death investigation, but we've never felt like we could sequence, other than defensive wounds have to be before she's subdued, and then the spinal cord one maybe last. But that's really interesting to think that maybe they did come up behind her and that's how it started, and then she flung around and was able to defend herself for a bit.
And Ray, it was a good point that you mentioned about the offender had some sort of a problem, grievance, an issue with her. And I always like to add in two qualifiers. They could be real or perceived.
Right. That's correct.
And perception to some people is their reality.
That's a good point.
To many people. So it could be they had a dating relationship and something went south and it was a mutual breakup on her part but he didn't see it that way. It could have been something she looked at him in a supermarket or the drugstore or wherever and just turned her head away real quick and just like ignored the person. So do you know, all that in mind, do you know if this was entered into VICAP, Violent Crime Apprehension Program with the FBI?
Good question. I don't know. I will keep that in mind, though, and see if they'll tell us.
The combination of stabbing and arson.
And arson, right.
It happens, but it's not the most common of sort of conjoined crimes or homicide comorbidities, if you will. So that's something that you can't do that. I mean, the police department has to do that. And certainly around that time frame, if nothing else, search for other arsons. Arson is... I talked this past week with the J5 bomber being identified, and I talked a bit on some news media outlets about, sort of the, serial bombers or one-time bombers. They're of a different ilk than many other violent criminals. They do their thing from afar. I mean, they'll place their bomb or mail it, then take off and maybe watch it from a distance, just read about it in the media, and they're happy. Arsonists, in some ways, are not all that dissimilar from serial bombers, but you do have to be up close and personal. You can get hurt making a bomb. You can get hurt lighting a place on fire.
Sure.
And you accidentally spill some gasoline or some kind of accelerant on yourself and the match goes anywhere near you, guess what? You're running around also on fire. So there's some risk involved in that, which means to me the person has done it before and is comfortable with it. I want to be careful. I'm not suggesting it's a volunteer or paid firefighter, but boy, if there's some other firefighter that they know about involved in domestic abuse, was living out in that general area at the time, there have been some firefighters, and I know many of them, professional, volunteer, they're great people, but every once in a while there's that person that surfaces that they're bored and they want to, they'll set a fire themselves. And then the fire department gets called out. But it could also be a good way of hiding the evidence of a crime scene when there's forensic evidence of yours in that crime scene. So what better way to get rid of it? You put a body in water, that helps, but you can also light it on fire and its surroundings, and that also takes away from some of there's still evidence to be found, and investigators do it all the time, but it makes it maybe a little more tricky to, in fact, get the readily available forensic evidence to make their crime. So, a lot of factors on this that between VICAP and these tie-in window removing. Does the guy have some sort of a skill set in
construction?
Light construction?
I know, exactly. I would never think. I would never trust him.
Who would ever think that? Jim, I think Jim is spot on, and I couldn't agree with him more. I think if they look in her social circles, this person, Jim's right. This is not his or her first rodeo. They pose a risk to others in their social circles. They've probably done this. They're going to this type of behavior is going to be repeated, especially if they become under stress or someone lies to them. And if you look at somebody that they earmark, it's important for them to look at prior criminal histories for things like domestic violence and violent tendencies, because both of those things correlate with crimes of overkill. And it just, it's not a stretch. It really isn't. It really isn't. I think this person was right under their nose. Yeah. They may have talked to him, and they never said, "Oh, it can't be this person." They're an upstanding citizen. Behind the curtain, remember with the Wizard of Oz, it was one person behind the curtain, and on the other side of the curtain, he was someone totally different.
Yep. And there's another aspect that I think really indicates knowledge of the property and Linda's habits, which is that she had a paper delivered every morning to her front porch. And her paper was usually delivered about 3:45 in the morning. The fire's called in at 3:58. So that leaves us with a 13-minute window, which is plenty of time for the fire to engulf the house. But it's almost like the person was in the yard waiting, because I interviewed the newspaper delivery. It was a couple. And I interviewed them, and they had been interviewed back in the day, but they're like, we didn't see anything. They definitely didn't smell smoke because they're driving with the car window down. Didn't see any flames, nothing that looked to them like a fire was already burning. So it's almost like the person waited till her paper got delivered and then knew they were in the clear, so to speak.
There's a deep familiarity with the property because they went out the back door. They knew where they were going. I don't know what the area looks like. Is it dense? Is it wooded area outside of her home, or is it more residential?
So it's residential. Now, to one side, to the east, is a very steep, long, wooded, shrubby, slippery, muddy slope that goes down to a creek. We were trying to walk it in the fall, like before snow and everything, and we were slipping around. And I'm like, I don't think anybody ran this direction. I think they ran out to the street, which was to the west, and then from there you can go north or south. And I think they went one direction or the other. But her house was pretty close to the street. It wasn't set back very far. There's neighbors pretty close. In fact, the side of her house where the window was removed faced her neighbor's house next door, the one who tried to come save her. They actually shared a driveway. That's how in close quarters they were, which has also like stumped us. The person took a huge risk taking that window off because they risk making noise and waking up that neighbor right there versus going to the back side of her house where there's no neighbor nearby. So don't know what to make of that. But the neighbor obviously didn't hear anything until the fire started to engulf the house and then the windows were breaking out and then that's what woke them up. But they also told us, we're pretty sure nobody was over there that night. The female partner of the spouse, she had just had a baby. She had like a 4-month-old baby who was colicky. So she was actually sleeping in the living room with the baby that night, which is right up against the driveway and the sidewalk street side. And she's like, if anybody pulled into Linda's driveway, which was also her driveway, she's like, the lights would have shone across our living room. And I feel like I would have seen and heard that. And they never saw or heard anything. So also, can't take that as pure gold, but also kind of indicates the person did have some plan in place and either walked there if they were close enough or parked a couple streets away so that their car wasn't at the park.
Most likely the latter. Yeah, they parked it a block or so away. And you probably wouldn't need that much accelerant for a wood-framed house. I mean, I don't know, a 2-liter soda bottle full of gasoline.
Yeah.
That would probably do the job. I'm not sure how much they used.
We don't know.
In the experiment, I mean.
I actually used I think it was charcoal lighter that squirts.
Okay. Charcoal lighter squirt.
And
even easier to carry and just spray it with the window out, whatever.
Yeah.
Interesting case. If the investigators are listening, the family or none of us can do this, but I would say consider contacting the VDOC Society at VDOC, vidocq.org. And Ray and I are both members, and you come and present the case. They'll fly you in. It doesn't cost you anything, but obviously we can get, some more details than a member of the public, which we all are here on this podcast right now. And there may be some other factors involved. So, So I would hope the investigators, in fact, and what would it be? The 30th anniversary is coming up in about 4.5 months.
2008. So Jim, that'll be right.
Of VDOC or of the case?
Of the case. 28th anniversary.
Right.
If I'm doing my math right.
Wait.
18th. I have another case I'm working 28
years old. Yeah, 18th. Yeah.
Math was never my strongest.
I was just going to say that, Jim. Don't worry. I got that.
Me either.
Jim, I'll hold up part.
All right.
I got
you. I'm trying to... Exactly.
An anniversary date is coming up on April 30th of next year.
That's correct.
That could be a good time to get the media back involved.
Yes.
Maybe a reward of some sort. VDOC Society. And but of course the agency has to do this. Hopefully the family would be involved. Does she have siblings left or?
Yes.
And she had some.
She had 8 siblings.
Wow.
Or has 8 siblings. None of them ever lived in that area or even in Washington. She's originally from Illinois. So most of them are still in that area. She has a couple in California. So didn't have any immediate family in that local area. But yes, they've been very involved with us in trying to keep, raise awareness for the case and pressure the police to take some of these investigative actions that should be taken and provide them resources like VDOC. They talked about that in their last meeting with police, and police are like, their excuse is, it's a civilian group, so we're going to have to get special permission.
Not. That's not true. Jen, that's not true. It's not completely civilian. There are some active law enforcement that are part of that group, but they have nothing to lose here.
I know.
It will never hurt what they're doing. It only helped them.
Yeah, they should then tell the Philly PD not to go to VDOC, the Boston PD who was there last month, and many,
Right.
many.
Yeah.
There's 9 to 10 cases a month we look at from departments of all sizes. So it's a nonprofit, but there are plenty of sworn officers and prosecutors and DNA people in there. So that's kind of a flimsy excuse, and I hope they're not using that as an excuse not to go. And it's paid for. It doesn't cost them a cent.
Yeah.
So all the travel plans would be covered. Maybe around April 30th, Jen, if you think there are some updates, we could bring you back on. And
sure.
The anniversary date. I mean, obviously, if we know anything more, any resolution, of course. And
sure,
folks, we can only do the best we can. All three of us are civilians. Ray and I, of course, walk the walk in our prior lives. But right now, we have to kind of deal with media accounts and other information civilians bring us. And Jen, you did a great job in putting this together. We don't know everything, but we certainly have enough information that I think we can point the investigation in the right direction. And I think Ray and I and you, Jen, did tonight. And let's hope maybe they'll listen to this and think of the next way to go to solve this.
Exactly.
I agree.
And I'm a civilian, but I do work cold cases at my sheriff's office, and I can do everything the detectives do except arrest somebody or swear to a search warrant. And I've told this agency that, and I'm like, I'm not here to compete with you. I'm here to help you, augment you, also give students some experience, and others, and provide you experts at no charge. But I also do work in law enforcement, so we're equals in a way, but that doesn't seem to matter.
That always concerns me when you offer something over and over and over again and they continue to deny it. Why?
Yeah, I don't know, because if a group like mine came to me at work, I'd be like, let's go. In fact, I was going to say, Fitz, we're waiting on some DNA results from Othram, and if we don't get a profile, I'm planning to submit one of my cases at work to the doc and see if you guys would be interested in going through it with us, because we're kind of at our end of our rope.
Hey, it'd be good to meet you in person. You get a chance to come out.
Definitely.
Ray, final words, and I'll let Jen.
Jen, as always, great work on this case. Great work on Break the Case, and all the things you're doing. I think it's fantastic. I wish there were more people like you, because there is no voice for the dead.
Right.
Nobody works for them.
Exactly.
And thank you for what you do. With that. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I will
Jen,
tell
one
listeners,
more time, tell us how to get in touch with you.
Okay. So we do have a $7,500 reward out there on Linda's case right now. We did not form our nonprofit to solicit donations, but if you want to contribute to her reward fund, on the website there's a donate button, and you can select from a drop-down menu that you want your money to go specifically to her reward fund. In the event the case gets resolved, and we don't pay out the reward, I'll send you your money back, or you can pay it forward to another victim's reward fund. So we're not out there trying to make a nonprofit for money, right? It's for the victims. So just want to let listeners know that. Our website is breakthecase.org. There's a ton of information on Linda's case on there. You can email me through there. We also have a Facebook group dedicated to Linda's case, and you can find that at Unsolved Murder of Linda Malcolm. We really welcome anybody and everybody to join. I don't care what your background is. I don't care if you've never investigated anything. I love hearing other people's points of view and debating different aspects of a case. And sometimes someone will just say, well, I have a background on this, and I thought of that, and it's like, oh my gosh, the light bulb goes off. So please, if you're interested, join the group. We welcome discussion. We don't moderate comments or anything like that. So we really encourage everybody to help us out on our investigations. So I think those...
And by chance, if you're the person responsible for Linda's demise, feel free to contact her group or Cold Red, however many years it's been. The anniversary is coming up, and it wouldn't be it'd never be too late to get this off your mind, get this off your chest. And we put that offer out to a few people in the past, and I know I have a case coming up in next month I want to talk about in that regard. Well, again, Ray, thanks for being my partner tonight again. Jen, thanks for coming on. I think it's your second time, and I have a feeling you'll be back on again. And everyone else, thanks for watching and or listening to this episode of Cold Red. Please like and subscribe, and anywhere you see us, check us out and other episodes on Cold Red Podcast. Thanks to our producers, Matt Robinson and Matt McLaughlin, our music coordinator, Rick Schilling, and everyone out there. Have a great night, stay safe, and we will see you next time on Cold Red.